Right, we'll get going. So, welcome to 5 Tactics to Smash the Science GCSEs. I will be your host, Talitha, and I taught for 9 years, but English. Please don't hold that against me. All to say, I do understand pressure of teaching core GCSEs specifically at this time of year. I'm just going to go through some housekeeping. So let me just share my screen. So there we go. Okay, I'm hoping everybody can see that. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Al, can you see my screen? You're on mute. It's like 2020 all over again.
I do it. I do it. Yes, I can. And it's absolutely perfect.
Fantastic. Okay, so a few bits of housekeeping before we begin. So you will be emailed a recording of today's webinar. So if you do have to rush off for whatever reason, please don't panic. We are going to email that in the next couple of days, hopefully tomorrow. We also really like to encourage you to use the chat function. It's not very often that a big group of specialists can get together from all over the country and share all the great things that they're doing in the classroom. So please use the chat function, share your good practice, and you can also use it to ask any questions that you might have. You're going to hear some mentions of learning by questions throughout the webinar, and we're going to do a demonstration at the end. I'd love for you to stay. Learning by questions is one of those things that I just really wish had existed when I was in teaching. It would have saved me so much time and would have really helped my students. It's incredibly powerful, and we'd love for you to hang around to see just how powerful it could be for you. You can get a 6-week free trial with no obligation, so there really is like nothing for you to lose. It's not the emphasis of this webinar. This webinar genuinely is about tactics that you can take away to use in the classroom, but I would love for you to stay to see the demo, just so that you can see just how fantastic this tool is. And finally, there is going to be another free required practical resource that you can use with your students, and that will also be sent to all attendees, and we'll run through what all of that is later on. So hang around. Okay, we're going to go to introduction. So I've introduced myself. Al, who are you? What's your experience? Can you share that with everybody on the web, please?
Oh, okay, so I'm out taught for nearly 20 years. For the first 10 years of that, I worked at a school in Accrington. I was second in the science department. Then for the other 10 years, I moved on to head department and assistant vice principal, but always with a focus on improving progress in the science department. And for the last 18 months, I've been working here at LBQ, and I'm the secondary science coordinator. So I help write the science content and organize it on the system and do this kind of thing. It's all fun.
You've done the full gamut, Al. Excellent, thank you so much. And Jaina, who are you? Who your experience in the classroom, etc.
So I'm Jaina. I'm currently in post as an assistant head teacher in a school in Hyndburn. I've been on SLT here for about 6 years. Prior to that, I've taught down south. I started as a classroom teacher, worked up to head of chemistry, second in department, and then pulled to SLT. And the role that I'm doing at the moment is it's all things data, so it's progress, achievement, assessment, reporting, that type of thing.
Amazing. LBQ helps that data side of things. That's great. Thank you. Okay, right. So today's webinar is all about tactics, and our first topic we're going to cover today is about making the tough decisions. Students versus school. Okay, we're talking about tiered decisions here, and how do you make those tiered decisions when you have to weigh up students' futures and well-being versus school progress? Jaina, can you run through a little bit about what you do or have done in the past?
Yeah. So in terms of what we currently do here is we're very much focused on a student's destination and where they're going next. So what we'll do is when we're making tier of entry decisions, we always like to check before putting them into foundation or higher, as well as the capabilities, is it going to limit them in the next step? And if it is going to limit them in the next step, what we can do to try and support that before we rule out them going on the higher paper, for example. But also alongside that, you then need your data to prove it. You can't, just because a student wants to necessarily be a doctor doesn't mean that they're capable and can achieve that. So you've got to guide them in the right direction, and make sure they're on the right tier of entry. So for us, it's a case of making sure that we have these conversations very early on in year 10, making sure that we know what pathway that they're going to be on quite early, so that nothing comes as a surprise as you go in through the dialogue with them later in the years, like as you get into year 11. I'd probably say that we use our data to back things up. So it's a case of, if they get 5 on the higher tier paper, you can stay on higher tier. If you're not getting that 5, it's then thinking about, do you need to be on the higher tier? Is there a reason? Or are you going to better securing the 5 on a foundation tier? And that then tends to keep the wider school happy, because you're securing as much. Do you wait until after the mocks? Yeah, so I'd say based on Key Stage 3 data that comes out, we set the kids at the start in September. And that, hopefully, if you've got reliable Key Stage 3 data and your end of year 9 tests are quite solid, you should hopefully not have too many discrepancies with that. The challenge probably coming through as well now is looking at, from whole school point of view, we don't have targets generated in the same way without the Key Stage 2 SATs due to COVID. So it's just making, because prior to that, we would always look at target data and then say, right, these kids need to be getting a 6 or a 7. But that's obviously going to be a challenge moving forward. So it's definitely reliant on your end of year 9 tests. And then, wait until the first end of mock season, which would be around November for us. And then if you tie that in correctly with parents' evenings, you can start to have those discussions quite early on.
Fantastic, thank you. And all to say that I have trusty assistants that are over on the chat. We'd love for you to answer questions that are being asked on the chat. Everybody share your good practice. Al, what about you? What have you done in the past?
I mean, I agree with everything Jane has said. Obviously, for me, I think we'll all kind of look back every single year, and we're all going to have a group of students that we're not really sure early doors. And my advice would be something that I've always done is, don't be afraid with some group of kids, although it may be counterintuitive. Don't be afraid with some children to make that decision very, very late on. As Jenny was saying, if we're collecting data and if we're having conversations with students and parents and teachers all along, and everybody that's involved in the decision is involved in the conversation that precedes that decision, then there's nothing wrong with leaving it very late for a small number of students. I've often left it even up until sort of the end of March or April in year 11 for a very small number of students before deciding what's the right tier for them. But again, you can only do that if you're having the conversations with senior management, parents, and the student, and you've got the data to support why you are uncertain.
Yeah. So obviously, with the best will in the world, and you've used data, so you'd hope that the tough conversations would be at a minimum. But what advice would you give for somebody who inevitably they're going to come across difficult conversations, either with students or parents? Al, what's your experience with that?
Well, I'll give you a direct example. I had a student a few years ago. I'd just moved to a new school at the time, and I'd taken on a year 10 class who'd started the triple science in year 9. And as far as senior management were concerned, as far as all the students were concerned, everybody was doing great, and they were flying high, and they were going to go on the obviously higher tier triple. But there was certainly a student in there that I felt was really, really struggling, perhaps misplaced. Attendance was poor, attitude to learning was poor, didn't respond too well to the school behaviour policies or the report system, etc. But I had a very good line manager at the time, assistant head, and because we were collecting a vast amount of data very, very early on, and we were constantly having the conversations about the student, with the student, we were involving the parents. We did make the decision in year 11 to say, listen, this isn't for you. And actually, this is quite a drastic situation, but it was best for that individual student, so they get something, that we took them off triple altogether and we entered them just for foundation combined science, which is a massive change, obviously, a massive change. Schools wouldn't normally like to do anything like that. Students wouldn't. But it really was what was best for that student. But we would never have got to that decision unless we collected all the data we needed beforehand.
Yeah. Jana, have you had any difficult conversations, any tips that you would use?
Yeah, it's probably the same as what Al said, to be honest. If you're collecting your data and your exam results and valid test papers from quite early on, you've got a backlog of that data to support your conversations. I tend to find that parents are quite happy with what the decision is, because at the end of the day, everybody that's around that table making that decision, the student, the parent, and yourself, all want what's best for that student ultimately. And if you think that they're going to drop off the bottom of the higher tier paper, that's not what's going to be best for that student when they could potentially secure a 5, which they can then take with them to college or wherever it is that they're going next. So I think it is just definitely about, like what Al said, making sure that you've got that evidence behind you. And yeah, I've had students, like a couple of days before the tier entry deadline is due, sat outside my office doing more exam papers just to get that proof of, right, do a foundation paper, right, do a higher paper. And you can sit with them and you can show them then, look, this is where you're getting stuck, this is where the crossover is, and this is where actually you've hit your limit, in a quite gentle way of saying, obviously. And I do think when you show them, well, actually, look, this is what you can achieve on this paper, and in comparison to this, it does make a difference with those conversations.
Yeah, Beth on the chat has actually said we're currently giving students the opportunity to sit a remock where students did the foundation tier in November, but they want to try the higher paper. So 5, they'll be able to do for the GCSE, which is really nice. Thank you for sharing that, Beth. Thank you very much. So to sum up, really, the tactic here is data and early communication. Okay, next up, we have interventions but going big. So here we want to talk about, how do you utilise the whole department when it comes to in-class interventions? So everybody on the chat, how do you deal with in-class interventions? Is there a way to incorporate the whole department? Al, how have you done this in the past?
Well, I'm just going to share one strategy that has been successful for me in the past. And I appreciate that this might not be a strategy that fits every school and every department, but we have used it. It has been really successful. So I'm going to throw it out there, and maybe you can take at least something from it. So what we can see on the screen here is essentially a set of starter questions that every child will get as they walk into the room. We have the specification. This is the AQA specification. In the left-hand column, we've got the question, which are usually AO1, so not always, but usually AO1 kind of recall questions. The student would have a space for their answer, and then obviously the teacher will go through the answers with the students, and they can mark right or wrong. The students will come in, they'd, just as a matter of routine, they'd answer the starter questions, and then they will be placed on the side of the desk for the duration of the lesson, where the teacher could walk around with a notepad or record pad and make a note of which students are getting which questions wrong. Now, you know, a 5-period science week for a triple science student, perhaps we would have the first 4 lessons of that week. And if we take what's on the screen as an example, every single one of those lessons will have a starter question, for example, on the biology 4.1.1.2, all right, and the physics 4.2.1.2 that you can see on the screen. We'd quite try and focus in on those individual areas. So by the end of the 4th lesson, that data could be looked at, could be analysed, and you can try and identify the areas that students are weak with. And then in the last lesson of the week, we would actually use the lesson time for intervention to strengthen these weak areas. We would actually have the students, if it was the biology section they were struggling with, to be redirected to the biology specialist, or the physics students being directed to the physics specialist, to have ongoing intervention with specialist teacher once a week. Now, I appreciate content is a lot to get through. We obviously started our GCSE in year 9, and it gave us time to do this. But you could perhaps adapt something like this, and rather than have lesson time being taken, you could have subject-specific homework. You could have a spreadsheet that links to specific videos. I'll give free science lessons a big shout out. I've never met the guy. I don't know anything about him, but, you know, his videos are quite good. You know, you could have resources for them, but we found that really, really worked, especially having those focus lessons once a week. And I'd give LBQ a big shout out for this. This is not a small amount of work to prepare all of these questions and to have that data analysed, but it is something that LBQ really would do instantly for you. But I'll leave it as for that for now.
Great. Thank you. Thanks. And Jaina, what do you do for interventions?
So thinking about sort of the staffing of interventions, something that we do here, which obviously you'd need to speak to your line manager, and it'd be a bit more of a whole school approach, is when students have finished their vocational courses, which is around this time now, they're starting to sort of finish, is we pull them out of their vocational subjects, like certain aspects of that. When they've finished and secure over there, we'll take them into science. If you've got the staffing capacity, if you've got teachers who are free at that time and who might be a little bit under on the timetable, just to do like small intervention groups. So it's not putting the onus on it being after school, it's not putting it on it being morning, it's actually happening in the school day, so you can definitely capture them. So that's one of the areas that we've sort of gained our time for intervention, is trying to do it in the school day, where rather than them sitting with the PE teacher and sending some work down, we're taking them back up into science, even if it's just one kid and you sat with them. Just letting them crack on with something like LBQ, for example, that they can do in the background. So it's not increasing your workload necessarily, but it just allows them to have that flexibility of asking you a question if they need to, rather than being distracted down in PE. So we're trying to utilise it. Basically every minute counts at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Great. We'll move on. So our tactic here is to utilise the time and skills of the whole department as much as is physically possible. Okay, next up we have revision and maximising the minutes. We've all done after school sessions. I know I did lunchtime sessions, and they can run away from you very quickly. How do you maximise those slots of time? Al, how have you utilised these revision times?
Okay, so something that worked really good for us, we sat down as a department and we said, look, what are our problems with the revision sessions? And it's important to make the distinction between revision and intervention. Yeah, an intervention timetable, I'm sure most of your schools, that will be dictated from senior management. They'll timetable certain nights and send certain students certain subjects. That tends to be the way things are done these days. But still, every minute counts. And if you can get feet through the door on a voluntary basis for revision sessions, let's go for it. But the problem tends to be with revision sessions is that students, will turn up and they won't really be sure what they want to work on. And you think about, you might have 20 minutes. How much of that time are you wasting at dinner time or a break time? How much are you wasting while a student mumbles to you about what topic is that they think they need help on? And sure, as a department, you could say, well, today we're going to do revision on, I don't know, the motor effect or whatever in physics. But is that really targeting where the student has a weak point? So this is how we got around it. We bribed them with food, obviously. We would put our dinner time revision session on, and we would use the department budget to buy chips for the kids. But there would be and that really got lots and lots of feet through the door. But the condition was you were not allowed any of that food, any of that chips, unless you came at the door with a very specific, well thought out question. So you couldn't come to the door and say, can you please teach me about cells today? Right? Because that shows that you haven't really been doing much thinking. But if you go to the door and say, look, sir, I have been revising cells, but I was looking at this part of the specification here, and I'm not really sure how the structure of this cell is related to the function of this cell. Obviously, that's a bit more specific, and they've been given thought, and they've identified a gap for themselves. And then, of course, you can come in, and we can help them with, instantly with things that they need. And if they engage in the session, then they can walk away with some chips at the end if they engage. And it's silly, and it's an odd way of doing it, but it really, really did work. We found we got a lot more feet through the door. It was a lot more purposeful. Kids left a lot happier. It just seemed to work for us anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And bribery goes a long way. Jaina, what do you do at your school?
So I'm going to just come off the back of the bribery. So for us, with some cohorts, you've got students that will follow you around and they're really engaged and they really want that extra revision. And some years you've just got cohorts that don't necessarily want to be there. So you've got to find ways of getting that through that door after school, because there's just not enough minutes in the day. So we do things like tickets to prom. So if you attend so many revision sessions, you get a stamp, and then you can get a bit of a discount on the ticket to the prom. The same thing with end of year hoodies, and then sort of like vouchers, anything like that. And food is always one of the biggest bribery tactics we use. So we've just started breakfast club for morning intervention to get them in the morning. So they get a hash brown and some beans, I think, in the morning, and then they go off to some intervention sessions during form time. So it's a case of that bribery, really, to make sure that you're getting them in, and then what you do with them when they're there is depending on how many members of staff you've got on the session. We just divide them into sort of 5+ groups, 4+ groups, that type of thing.
Yeah. Rachel's just said in response to you, Al, that would that deter the lazier kids, though, if they're kind of required to bring something to the session? Did you find that was the case?
Well, teaching is about relationships with kids, isn't it? And you know who those like lazy kids are. You know how to deal with them. For us as a strategy, it did work. It did work really well. But if you've got an exceptionally lazy student who comes to you and can show that they've at least put an ounce of thought into what they're doing, compared to they would actually, normally when they would have put no thought into it whatsoever, then you're getting something extra out. It's about getting that every extra little bit, isn't it? So you've got to use your judgment, and teaching is about relationships and knowing how to deal with kids, and you do that on a. But if they were that lazy and there was no chips, they wouldn't be coming for revision anyway. They just wouldn't be there.
That's true. That is true. That is true. Thank you so much. What about the workload with regards to revision sessions? Because I know from my time as a teacher, it was a big workload. How do you deal with that, especially, given you're both in leadership positions? How do you deal with that, Jaina?
So I'll probably say for me, and this is where I would sing LBQ's praises, really, because that for me has been there's been years, like a few years ago, where, staffing instability, there's not been many full-time qualified members of staff in the department. I've wanted to blanket cover the kids. So I've had full year groups in for revision, for revision sessions, and we've got them in the hall, and then we've got them onto LBQ because it allows that tailored approach. It gives them the feedback, so you don't have to be on top of each child all the time. You're getting that feedback live. You can intervene where you need to. You can set, 2 or 3 question sets by ability and group them. So it's just when we've tried to do like blanket revision and minimizing workload, and something that even the least experienced ECT can access, right the way through to somebody who's just turned up in the morning and being like, can you just help me with this revision session, please? It allows for that non-specialist teaching as well. And I would say it does minimize workload. So it is just, for me, that's one of the things that I use to manage my workload. If I've found out I've got an ad hoc revision session and haven't necessarily had time to get things printed or whatever it might be, and then I can go away and analyze that data afterwards, take it away, and then think about like some exam questions to follow up with the next revision session.
Oh, well, thanks. That's great. Fabulous. Right. So the tactic here, for the most part, is to motivate students to take ownership and to attend. That's with bribery. Okay, let's go on to our next topic, which is being savvy with focus. So once content is more or less covered, if you're lucky to get to that point, how do you know what to focus on? How do you find the gaps to then know what to focus on? Jaina, I'm going to come to you first. And again, just to remind everybody in the chat, if you've got anything that you can highlight as a great way to find gaps, please share it on the chat. Jaina, how do you find the gaps?
So we've recently, in the last year and a half at this school, we've used something from Get Better Faster, which is a book, and it's got the Uncommon framework in it, and it's called, it sounds horrible, but it's not that bad. It's called aggressive monitoring, and it's basically, rather than taking your books away and marking your books and spending that weekend marking your books and then coming in and the kids flicking through and then having a look and saying, right, that's actually outdated information now. It's all about live marking in the classroom. So we basically go around and we live mark how the students are doing, whether it's them peer assessing, self-assessing, but we record how they're doing in the lesson. in live time, which then we go away and then adapt our next lesson based on what we've done in that lesson. Although it sounds like it's more workload, it's actually drastically reduced the workload in terms of you not having to take your books home and mark them. And you get in that, you can then implement you can close those gaps in learning for the next lesson. You're not waiting until you've got around that cycle, that 2-week cycle of marking your books to be like, right, I now want to intervene on this. And the kids have forgotten, the students, sorry, they've forgotten what you've done, you know. They forget sometimes, don't they, what they had for breakfast. So they're not gonna, they don't remember what, especially the lower sets, they don't remember what you marked 2 weeks ago. And also LBQ again, that's another bit where we'll use it for gaps. So we use it, we call it at the end of the lesson, predominantly for us. Across the science department, we try and use it at the end of every lesson, run a quick question set, and then it gives you that colourful matrix that you can take away and you know where your gaps are.
Yeah, fantastic. Just on the chat, somebody's put, Beth has put, I've been covering the modules which my class did the worst in from their end of test, which has been working well. Erin's put, be tactful and create your own exams using Exam Pro rather than a past paper. That way you can really see where they are. Fantastic. And also, if anybody's interested in the book that Jana mentioned, we have put a link to that in the chat. So feel free to have a look at that. Al, what about you? Is my sound okay? Is it coming through okay?
It's coming through okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. So Al, yes.
Yeah, the aggressive monitoring, I love that term. And I'd never heard of it until I spoke to you, Jane, about it. I can just imagine, like, you know, the idea of, you know, like say being on it in the classroom. And I mean, I would back that 100%. The kind of starter activity we talked about before would fall, I suppose, in that kind of field. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw a little bit of LBQ into this, because if you are doing that kind of aggressive monitoring, you're collecting data there on the spot as much as you can. Well, LBQ will do that for you. The amount of data that it will collect is and how quickly it will collect it is extremely impressive if you've not seen it before. But also, I did notice a comment pop up about using Exam Pro. Oh, you mentioned that to create your own exams, etc.
Yeah.
Again, something we'll show you in the demo later on. You could do that within 45 seconds to a minute with LBQ. You can get you onto from a wide range of topics. So yeah, both of those are really, really good tips. So I guess I was just thinking LBQ's praises there, but I think it fits in well.
Thank you. So we want it. Right, okay, so the tactic here is targeted starters, aggressive monitoring, and learning by questions. Okay, we're on to our last point now, and this is revising required practicals. Now, I know from my own personal experience, I published a blog that was about revising required practicals, and it got a lot of people interested. A lot of people were reading this blog. So I know that it must be a pain point in a science teacher's world. So revising required practicals, how do you embed the knowledge of a practical that might have happened 3, 6, 12 months ago, possibly even longer for some students? Jana, how do you go about encouraging students with required practicals?
So we base a lot of our revision sessions on the required practicals, because although you think you're only covering a practical, if you plan it correctly, you can actually cover a lot of content at the same time. So we'd probably do a recall starter, a little bit like Al showed before, you know, quite generic across a few topics. And then we would then do the theory for that practical, trying to build in as much synoptic information as possible at that time, just so you're covering a wider range of information. And then, you know, you demonstrate the practical, you do the practical when you're revising, and then going then to fill in something which is more practice-based afterwards, which again, something like an LBQ question set or an exam question from Exam Pro, something like that, just to consolidate the knowledge. But hopefully by doing the theory first, then doing the practical, following up with something to consolidate that's exam question based, like I said, from Exam Pro or LBQ, it should then consolidate enough. And if you've got enough synoptic links in there, you're revising a few things over a period of time. So that's the way that we try and tackle it.
Yeah, fantastic. Deep learning with that contextual understanding. Al, what about you?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I always found that quite a tricky thing, because they can seem quite woolly in a student's eyes, required practicals. They really can. And obviously we would revisit them with the starter questions, etc. We're constantly looking back at them. But I agree with everything Jane said there. But I'm really excited that I get to say this next bit, because if I was teaching, this is what I would be using, and this is the freebie that you're all going to get. So this will probably be the highlight of the show for you guys. This is. I'll let you put it on the screen, Talitha.
Strap in, everybody. It's the LBQ's Required Practicals Cookbook preview.
I'll let Talitha tell you how you're going to get this, but you are going to get it completely free. Now, essentially on LBQ, we have all 28 required practicals. We have question sets, or banks of question sets for. We have 4 question sets for every required practical. The first question set will focus on how you plan the required practical. The second question set will be on analyzing the data. And then, as Jana was saying before, obviously there's a lot of revision that's related to other parts of the specification related to the practicals. We have question sets for foundation and higher level students that you can also access for each required practical. And you can see on the screen there's little QR codes. The students will simply scan the QR code and you have those. And you will be getting those for free for all of those 28 practicals. But I'll let Talitha tell you how you're getting those.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be emailing these to anybody who's signed up to the webinar, anybody who's attended. You'll be getting a copy of this cookbook. And we'll show you a little bit how it works in the demo as well. Just hang tight. I promise that it's coming to you on email as soon as is physically possible, but do keep an eye on your junk, because our emails do end up in junk for obvious reasons. So just bear that in mind. It is coming, and it's also going to have a double page spread on that you'll be able to photocopy for students, so that you're not having to photocopy loads of colour or lots and lots of pages. It will have like an A3 sum up double page spread within it as well. So that should make it a little bit easier for you to kind of distribute with your students. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so our tactic here is emphasis on context and theory, and LBQ's Required Practical Cookbook, which will be emailed out to everybody as soon as is physically possible. Okay, fantastic. Right. Okay. So just to sum up the 5 tactics that we've been through. So in making tier decisions, it's about data and early communication. With interventions, you're utilising the time and skills of the whole department. With revision sessions, motivate students to take ownership and to attend, possibly with chips. Focus and gap finding, that's targeted starters, aggressive monitoring, and learning by questions. And revising required practicals is emphasis on context theory and LBQ's Required Practical Cookbook, which will be emailed out to everybody. Okay, I am now going to pass over to Al to demonstrate learning by questions. So strap in, everybody, because this is exciting. It's potentially going to revolutionise your life.
Okay, so let's see if I can learn how to share a screen first. Should we do that?
Yeah.
So I will share learning by questions. Let me know if at any point that the screen sharing stops. All right, so what I'd like you to do is, if you do have a smart device, if you scan the QR code, it will log you straight into LBQ. If not, there's a web link on the screen. You can type that in and then just insert the code that you see.
They've actually got it in the chat as well. So if you follow the link that's in the chat, you can also do that, but that will bring it up on your screen on the webinars on as well.
Yeah. Perfect. So I can see some people are joining now. And if you've got any, I see quite a lot of you are joining now. Once you're on, start answering. And I know you're all science teachers and we want to show how bright we are and get everything right. Please don't get them right. Please just guess. Just take a stab in the dark. And God, we've got quite a lot of people on there, haven't we? Just take a stab in the dark. Get some wrong deliberately. You know, just get through 6 or 7 questions if you can. I'm going to take the thing off screen now. So if you're not on now, I think we've definitely got plenty, but we'll look at some questions in more detail soon. But I'm going to take that off now. You would have seen the results populating that grid in real time, like we can see on the screen here. We can see green dots represent a student has got something correct. Red dots represent they've got it wrong. The number inside the red dot tells us how often they're getting it right or how often they've got it wrong. And the yellow ones, obviously, they've got it right eventually, but they've taken 2 or 3 attempts. Again, we can see that in the number on the screen. And as a teacher within the classroom, you can really see, obviously, how powerful that this kind of tool will be and the kind of conclusions and decisions you can make real time. So, for example, if I was stood in the classroom here, I would be thinking about pupil 16. So these are all fake names for obvious reasons. I'd be thinking about pupil 16 and wondering what they're doing to be getting everything wrong without trying and getting the answers correct a second or third time, or even getting them wrong a second or third time. They just seem to be getting a question wrong and moving on. I will be straight over to pupil 16 and I'll be spending time with them at the point of need there and then. So we can't just look horizontally though at individual students. We can also look vertically. So if I look on this question set, perhaps at question number 5, I can see that it seems a lot of people in the class are struggling at question number 5. So if I was to click on that, I might wonder what the class are saying. And I might ask to view the responses to that question. And while I'm looking at the responses, which are here, I might be able to form some kind of idea, some kind of pattern of what they might be doing right, what they might be doing wrong, what the misconceptions in the class are. We can see I've got this column over here that says most common wrong answer. So I could also see for each question which questions students are getting wrong mostly, or what those misconceptions might be. And then I might decide to do a little bit teaching around that topic. So I might have figured out that they don't know, for example, I don't know what the unit of kinetic energy is, maybe, for this question. So I do a little bit of teaching. I might pull down the whiteboard and I might do some more teaching. And then I can send that question back out to the students in the class. So everybody in the class can have another go, or have a go at a question that I've come up with on the fly for those students. So you can see how powerful that might be when you're in the classroom with the students. Really, really powerful tool. There's lots and lots of strings to the bow. You can dig as deep as you want with the data here. We can look, I think it's covered up on the screen for me with the Zoom call, but you can look at how the students are progressing through the question set, how long it's been since a student has answered a question or not answered a question. So you can get a gauge for which students are kind of drifting off and looking out the window and which aren't. So it's a really, really powerful tool that will all be populated the very instant a student answers a question. Really, we've been talking a lot about collecting data and question level analysis, and this does it for you real time. Now, this data obviously can all be stored and it can all be saved. And as a head of department or head of year or whatever, or parents even as a teacher, we can see how important that data will be for a multitude of different reasons. But it's not just the data that I think makes LBQ quite unique. It's what happens when a student gets a question wrong. So if I maybe look at that question that we brought up, I think it was question 5, wasn't it, on the kinetic energy set? So let's find that down here somewhere. Right, there we go. So if I bring up this question set, and this is where some physicists in the chat might want to suggest something. Let's look at question 5 that was there. So here's the question, and actually it was nothing to do with the units of kinetic energy, but what it was a question about applying the equation for kinetic energy. So let's have somebody in the chat suggest how might a student new to this topic get this wrong? What might they forget to do or not understand? Let's see what people in the chat say. See if you get any comments, Talitha, and just read them out. But you are muted as well, just let you remind you.
Yeah. So somebody says miss out the indices.
Okay, so
somebody
not
else says
square.
forgetting to square. Yeah, forgetting to square.
All right,
the
so
whole rather than just speed. Quite a few coming through.
let's do that. We'll take that first one. Let's forget to square. Now, I actually don't have a calculator, so I know Sue, the math specialist, is watching someone with a calculator. You might unmute yourself, but if we did take a calculator, I'll have one on my phone. Let's forget to square the speed. Let's do that. calculator. So I'm going to put 0.5 times.
No, I've got 9.625.
Right, you beat me to it. Thank you.
Might be wrong.
Thanks, Sue. All right, so no, it's good. So we'll have two significant figures, and we'll put that in as 9.6. And when we pop that in there, it instantly tells the student what, not just that they've got it wrong, but why they've got it wrong. So a student who's able to process simple feedback like that, you know, is simply going to be able to go, oh, I forgot to score the velocity, and then they're going to be able to carry on with the question sets rather than just being told they're wrong and then putting the hand up and waiting. And that's where the low level disruption starts, isn't it? When somebody's waiting for the teacher because the teacher needs to be somewhere else, they don't feel like they can progress. You know, suddenly start turning around, whoa, chatting or flicking the ears of the person next to them or whatever. You know, this really kind of cuts out that kind of dead time, and the student can just kick on with that feedback. And I can guarantee if we'd have not put the answer to two significant figures, it would have said. If we would have not half the mass, it would have said. Because as teachers that write the questions, we're always thinking about these misconceptions and what the wrong answers might be that the students put in. So we think that's we're really proud of that. Actually, I think that's a really powerful part of the software.
Yeah, and just sorry, if I could just point out, just to be really specific. So when students will scan the QR codes that appear in the required practical cookbook, these are the question sets. This is what they're going to see when they scan those QR codes. The only difference will be that you won't have all the data that comes off the back of it. So they'll have access to the resource and all of the feedback that they get with that. You just won't get all the great stuff that comes off the back of it, just to be really clear.
I've just realised something, Talitha. Because we're recording the Zoom call,
Yes.
it was a data protection issue that stopped the results coming through real time, I think.
Oh, okay, great.
So
Well,
that's well, it wasn't my internet, it was data protection. So I would imagine. Right, okay. So one thing I did mention before is the adaptability of this. If you are thinking of creating bespoke exams, like was mentioned before, or lesson starters like we talked about, it's very, very, very adaptable. So I mean, physics was my favorite subject. So let's say I wanted to put together a physics starter containing questions from different topics. It would literally be as quick as me saying, whoa, I quite like that question from this topic. I quite like this question, and I'm tapping the blue buttons here, and it's storing them in my question collect. I might scroll down and say, well, let's have a couple from electromagnetism as well. Maybe, or maybe just on magnets, I'll have that question and I'll have that question. And then when I go up to this question mark, the question collect symbol in the top right-hand corner, it presents all the questions I've collected, and I can simply just hit save. And when I've hit save, I can send that to the students as a bespoke question set. Now, if you do happen to be doing some questions in the lesson and you don't get a chance to finish and you want to set them for homework, well, that's easy as well. I mean, we really are a classroom tool for, you know, really, really good for classroom use. But of course, we do offer what we call independent study or homework. And if I want to convert a set to independent study, I've simply clicked on the data, clicked convert to independent study, and I can choose the date I want to send that. I can choose the time, and I can even just write a little note to the students. But I might not want to set the same homework for everybody. When I'm looking on here, I can see in the lesson, actually, maybe Katie, and these are made up names, obviously, Katie, Orla, Daniel, I might just want to set it for them. They look like they could do, and maybe Oliver down here might want some of that as well. And I can set that specifically just for those students. And when they log on, that'll be there waiting for them as their homework. And I can set a different question set for the other students in the class. So it's really quite versatile that way. Let me just close that calendar. Have we got any other questions coming through, or anything, Helen or Sue, that you think people might like to see that I've glossed over?
Questions are definitely being dealt with. I think Sue and Helen are kind of on it. On the Sue?
No, I think you cover most of it. So it's the adaptability is there, and it's instant. Everything is instant. You've got the data there to act on in class. You can, when you're setting homeworks, you could do a quick adaptation and set a more relevant homework for certain pupils. So it's just about having all that data to hand in the moment, so you can act on it, not having to go away and mark books before you realise something's happening in the classroom.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, could you just say a little bit about, oh, somebody has asked, can parents monitor too?
That is an excellent question for Helen to answer.
Do you know, I knew you were going to say that. I was just about to answer that one, actually. I would say, so there isn't a specific kind of data part of the platform that parents can look at. However, when pupils are answering, there is they can see along the top how they're doing, and they can see red or green, and they can see whether they're getting it right or wrong kind of as they're going along. So there isn't a specific kind of data bit for parents. However, teachers can share with parents how the pupils are getting on, and they do have the ability, teachers, to go in at a pupil level and delve down into the data.
Thank you.
Okay,
very much,
no
Helen.
worries.
Somebody's put a question about independent study. Does it set it a date to complete by, i.e. if it's set for the 3rd of March, then it's due then, or it's only open for that day?
Well, I mean, that will be up to the teacher themselves. If I was to set, let's just set this one as independent study, or convert that to independent study, I can obviously choose the date that I want it on, and I can choose the time that I want it done by. So students will be able to complete it up until that time. That's what you meant? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, so
I think what they're, sorry, Helen, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, yeah, basically, as soon as you set it, it's live, and then you choose the end date. So it's live for all the way along until you set the end date, just like I was saying. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Cool. And what kind of feedback can the students get for written answers as opposed to calculations? Because obviously we have different types of answers that come through. So Al?
Yeah, we've got a variety of different types of questions. We do have open-ended questions where you can type in short written answers. And the answer to that is it will depend on the length of the question. If it's a short written answer, maybe you're naming subcellular structures, or something short and snappy, then the system will mark that and assess that. And what we try and do with those as well is predict spelling mistakes. So if we were to dig up subcellular structure question set and look at all the different ways in which we accept the spelling of cytoplasm, for example, you'll probably find 10, 15 different ways. And of course, if a student has spelt it wrong, we will correct them on the spelling and tell them what the spelling should be, but we won't penalize the spelling if they've identified it correctly. We try and separate those skills. So you will certainly get kind of like high quality feedback on those types of questions. If it's something a little bit longer, maybe you're explaining a method, or you're trying to explain how you might increase the precision of measurement in one of the required practical sets, there are a small number of questions, and we do tend to keep these to a minimum, but there were a small number of questions that would be looked at by the teacher and brought up on the screen by the teacher in the moment to look at within the class. And you could scroll through each student's answers, but they wouldn't be.
Sorry, Al. Sorry.
No, I'm going to say they wouldn't obviously be marked correct or incorrect if it's a lengthier piece of writing.
We've had a really good question from Beth, which sort of links to coverage, actually. So how can you distinguish between higher and foundation questions?
Well, you could distinguish just by looking at the title of the question set. So we have, let's just type in higher here, and we can see straight away that it will just zoom in and filter out the higher question sets. These are the higher question sets for the microscopy, because that's a little subtopic I'm in, but they are in the question sets themselves. However, if you, doing the title of the question sets themselves. However, that leads on to a really important feature, which is the scheme feature. Up here, it says select a scheme for this class to follow. And when we click on that, we can actually we can see here we've got our separate science biology, separate science Edexcel, combined science biology. These are schemes that you can make bespoke for your own school, and we can certainly also help out with that. When we click on a scheme, so this is the AQA biology, you'll recognize these titles here. So on our system, the go-to ones on our system will combine foundation and higher. And these obviously are the headings on the specification we can see on the left-hand side, and the associated question sets we've got for each of those. So let's have a look at bioenergetics. So here we go for that. Yeah, brilliant. And again, we can see higher in the title. But if you wanted to create a purely foundation scheme, then if you just click the create and modify schemes button here, you'll be able to edit that scheme and just remove any of the higher question sets that you wanted, but they'll be recognizable by the title name.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Al. Would you, I'm going to take over sharing screen. I'm hoping I can actually do.
I'll stop sharing.
Oh, thank you.
Al, can I just raise a question that Caroline's just brought up? Is it mainly for AQA at the moment?
No, if I'd have gone into a bit more detail on the schemes, I'd have been able to show you the Edexcel schemes as well. And what we've done as well is adapt questions so they represent Edexcel language, and we've made them bespoke Edexcel question sets with Edexcel in the name. So just off the top of my head, mitosis, I'm pretty sure that Edexcel, you've got to know the prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. Keywords whereas you don't in AQA. That's off memory, but I'm pretty sure that there's a specific set with that. We've adapted it to put that exact language in there. So yeah, it's equally valid for AQA as Edexcel.
Amazing, thank you. Did we have any other questions, Sue, on the chat?
There was only one that was quite early on. Emma mentioned when Jana, you were talking about how secure is the 5, you know, when you're talking about tier entries. So we were looking at a 5 that's a couple marks off the 6, or do we go with higher tier on a lower 5?
I think it depends. For me, it would depend on how close we are to the exam. Yeah. So if it's, let's say, November in year 11 and there are a couple of marks off of a 5, I'd say, yeah, fine, stay on higher, because, you know, you would expect that a student that's working towards the higher paper is likely to make some progress between November and the final exam. If it's April and they're just scraping that 5, I think it would be looking across, you need to look across all the exam papers. It's a bit more of it's not as clear cut. But again, you would expect that whatever they sit in a mock, as long as it's an unseen paper, and I think that's the key bit there. If you're looking very close to tier deadline and you're not sure, it's whether you think it's an unseen paper. Do you think they've got the answers from the internet? Do you think that they're going to go away and revise? And you know that as a classroom teacher, you know the student you've got in front of you. You know very well whether they're going to be diligent or they're just you know, they're not actually that bothered. And I would probably say your gut feeling goes for a lot when you're teaching, doesn't it? And I think you know when you know your kids, you know the students that are sat in front of you. But I would say that if they meet the 5 criteria and they've got time before you're making that decision to the exam, then I would say you should be okay with it, because you would expect that they never revise the same way that they do for a mock, the way that they do for the real exam. So they are going to make some progress in that time, which is why you say 5, really, isn't it?
Thanks, Jana.
Thank you. Right, so to round off the webinar, if you would like to trial learning by questions for free for 6 weeks with no obligation, you can book a meeting with us. Now, we have the meeting because we just need to get to know what you want out of the 6-week trial. What specifically for your department, you know, what goals do you have for your department? What do your pupils need? It'll be a quick 20 minutes. I know it might seem a little bit intimidating when meeting with a salesperson. It's actually not. It would be with Al. So you don't need to worry about that. You book in the meeting, and then we can get to know what your needs are, show you everything that you would need to know on the platform, and then get you going. So it's all about making the trial. There's a link to the trial page directly in the chat. I think it's been posted a couple of times as well. And there's also the link is up on the screen, and you will of course be emailed the link and also the recording to this. webinar in your email. I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much to Jana and Al for all your input during this webinar. I hope that everybody has taken some absolutely amazing tips and tricks that they can use with their year 11s over the coming weeks. And best of luck for the Science GCSEs. Thank you so much, everybody.
Good
We
luck.
hope you enjoyed it.